So the most common musculoskeletal complaint, and one of the most common things that a GP will see, is back pain. And that's because at least 80% of the population will have at least one episode of back pain in their lives, with around 90% of those cases recovering within a 6-week period. Now, this leads to back pain being one of the most common causes of disability in the young and middle-aged, which can also lead to financial difficulties because of people not being able to work due to their back pain. However, despite this commonness of back pain, there's still lots of myths surrounding it, and I'm going to tackle 5 of those today. So, common myth 1. A scan is needed to know what's going on. Now, from a previous video, if you remember, I mentioned that pain does not equal damage. And we know this because of scan findings that we get back regularly. So somebody with back pain will have an MRI scan of their back, and the MRI won't show any explanation for that pain. But that person is still in pain, but the scan has returned normal. And I put normal in inverted commas because there are a fair few number of common findings that are abnormal, which I'm going to go to in a moment. So with scans for back pain, we know that scans only show something serious in less than 5% of cases. And of that small number, it's very likely that there are other associated symptoms alongside the back pain. And this could be something like leg pain and weakness. It could be changes to bladder control and sensation. It could be sensory changes in our private areas, or it could be difficulties walking due to loss of balance or leg weakness. Now, these are all more serious signs, and usually if these signs present to a healthcare professional, they are trained at picking up on those signs and referring that person down the appropriate urgent or emergency pathway. However, something I do want to stress is those signs are very, very, very rare and occur in less than 1% of the population. Also, with scans such as MRIs, there are some very, very normal findings that can sound quite worrying if not explained correctly. And this is what I mentioned earlier when I said that there are abnormal findings that are very, very common. They're still reported on as abnormal, but actually they are present in the normal population, even those without pain as well. So an example of that might be bulging discs. Now, bulging discs occur in 52% of the population and often are quite an incidental finding that aren't related to someone's pain. A bulging disc becomes relevant when it may be touching a nerve root and causing some leg pain, but otherwise bulging discs occur in the majority of the population without any significant cause for pain. Another common finding on an MRI scan is degenerative discs, and this is probably the most common abnormal finding on an MRI scan because it occurs in 90% of the population. And it makes you wonder there then, is it really abnormal if it's occurring in 90% of the population? Probably not, but it's still reported as abnormal on an MRI scan. And this is why it's really, really important to know that some of these findings are normal in the population and aren't a cause for concern. And that's why when, as health professionals, we get these scan findings back, we aren't too concerned about them. Another thing to mention with MRI findings, such as bulging discs or degenerative discs, or even spondylosis, which is arthritic changes in spines, the older that we get, the more likely it is that we're going to see some of these changes on an MRI scan. And these are normal age-related changes that happen as we get a little bit older. So someone in their 60s or 70s is more likely to have some of these findings on an MRI scan than someone in their 20s. In the same way that as we get older, our hair starts to get greyer, we also start to get these changes on our MRI scans of our backs. Now, in the same way that grey hair doesn't cause headaches, some of these findings on the MRI scans don't cause back pain as well. And it's really important to note these figures that I just mentioned earlier, they're actually taken from the general population, so those with and without back pain. Now, one thing I just want you to take a pause and think about is, let's say that you have back pain and you go to see your GP or your physiotherapist, and that person then organises an MRI for your back. Okay. Now, let's say that the MRI findings come back and it shows that you've got one bulging disc at one level and you've got 2 or 3 degenerative discs as well. Now, if that's not explained properly and that's the only information that you're given, how are you going to feel when you leave that consultation? If you've been told you've got some bulging discs and degenerative discs, which sound quite worrying, without a proper explanation behind it, then naturally, because we're human at the end of the day, we're probably going to be a little bit more fearful around certain movements or activities or returning to, work tasks or our usual leisure activities. And this can actually be a big cause for disability in the long term. Because these findings sound worrying, They actually increase the fear that we have around certain activities, and it means that we reduce those activities over time, and our back pain actually continues to get worse. Really interestingly, there's been studies done on people where they've taken MRIs of people with back pain, and one group of participants they told the MRI results to, another group of participants they didn't tell the MRI results to. And the group that actually did better in the long term were those that didn't know the results of their MRI scan. And that's just because the group that did, they developed a little bit more fear around their back and their back pain. And actually this led to more disability in the long term. Okay, so let's take a look at myth 2. Okay, right. So the old sales technique to keep you coming back for more manipulations. So let me just confirm straight away that there's no evidence that back pain is caused by your bones or your joints coming out of place or your pelvis coming out of alignment. We may see that there's slightly different alignment from individual to individual, and everyone's body's different, and that goes for things like scoliosis and so on. Now, a lot of the time things like scoliosis, if it's mild, isn't a cause for back pain, as there are lots of people with scoliosis who live pain-free, but we do have to be aware that there may be some changes from birth. Our body's very good at adapting. So if there are slight changes from birth and one person looks slightly different to the other, that's going to be normal for their body, and their body would have actually adapted to being in that position. If we go and actually try to change something, it can lead to more pain. So our bodies are very, very good at adapting. And the bottom line is that back pain is not caused because joints or bones are out of line or your pelvis is out of alignment. Just going back to the point I mentioned earlier about manipulations. So manipulations can give a short-term relief, so very short-term pain relief. However, this is because of very short-term changes in the nervous system, muscle tension, and also a little bit of placebo as well, which means that the results of that can last for, maybe a couple of hours or, a day. But actually the effects of manipulations don't really last for much longer than that. That's the reason that people often then have to keep going back to the same person to get those manipulations, because the effects are so short-lived. It isn't really the case that those effects are felt because anything's being realigned, because our spines and our pelvis are just so much stronger than another human can change. But it is because of more of the short-term effects that I mentioned just a moment ago. Okay, myth 3. This is just so much fun. Okay, rest is needed to recover. So for the first initial few days, you might find that reducing your aggravating activities is helpful in quietening down the pain a little bit. But actually outside of the aggravating activities, you still want to remain active. Our bodies are designed to move and they're designed to be active. And actually rest can actually prolong the symptoms and actually make recovery a lot slower. And even after the initial few days of reducing the aggravating activities, we do want to have a look at ways in which we can gradually return to those activities so that they don't become avoided over time. There's a previous video on the pain cycle that I've done, which explains the impact of avoidance over time. So if you haven't already, check that one out. But basically what that tells us is that function reduces over time. That can have an impact on our mood and the way that we're feeling, which can then lead to more pain. And we want to try and minimize the effect of that if we can. So it's really important that we gradually start getting back to painful or avoided activities when we can. The general rule is the longer that we leave it for, the harder it is to return to because of pain and also other changes such as loss of strength or loss of flexibility or fitness and so on. The worst thing that we can do when we have an episode of back pain is bed rest. That is an absolute no-no because our back will stiffen up and it's just likely that the pain is going to stay for a little bit longer if we're not moving and active. Myth 4, surgery is needed. So surgery is only really needed in a very, very small number of cases. So between 1 to 2% of cases may require surgery. So most people can actually manage more effectively by remaining active, understanding their pain to reduce their fear around movement and so on. And also by just kind of identifying other factors that might be contributing towards the pain. So I've spoken about how complex pain is previously, and we know there's a range of factors that are involved in pain. We have the biological factors, the psychological factors, and the social factors. So it's really important to just kind of have a broad overview of what might be contributing. And actually, on average, when we look at the research, spinal surgery is no more effective at managing pain in the medium to long term as non-surgical strategies like exercise are. Finally, myth 5, appear on my hand. Kind of. So bending and lifting is bad for our backs. No. Our backs are designed to bend, lift, twist. And we know this because we've done it all the way throughout history. So even if we look back at our ancestors and the cavemen, all the way through to, modern day sports people and weightlifters, our backs are designed to withstand quite heavy loads, and also they're designed to move in lots of different directions. And that's actually how they're happiest moving as well, is they want to bend, they want to lift, they want to twist. And our backs are just extremely strong structures. Now, obviously, if you lifted something that is heavier than usual for you to lift, there may be a chance where you may be in a little bit of back pain. But actually, gradually exposing your back to higher loads can actually reduce the risk of injury in the future, because your back's just more prepared for it. As it goes, the more we avoid a particular activity, the more likely it is to be painful when we return to it, or we have to do it as a one-off. The more we expose to an activity, the less painful it's likely to be. Now, we can think about that in ways of bending and lifting. So let's say that we avoided bending and lifting because we thought it was harmful for our back, but then we drop something on the floor and we're in a tight space, so we can't do that funny kind of lunge that we do when we keep our back straight, and we have to bend our back. We go to pick up the thing, our back's going to be in more pain because it's just thinking, whoa, what's going on here? We don't usually move in that way. Whereas if we actually expose your back to that movement and practice it often, and that same situation happens, your back's like, yeah, practice this loads of times, I'm more happy doing this, the pain's much likely to be less. So guys, just to wrap up, as always, this channel or the Wellness Puzzle in general should not replace appropriate medical advice. If you are struggling with back pain that's ongoing for more than 6 weeks, or you do have some leg symptoms as well, then I would encourage you to speak to your GP. But this channel here is just for educational purposes only. So a way of me to share my kind of knowledge and experience with you guys to hopefully help you make a little bit more sense of the back pain that you are having. Alternatively, if you're a healthcare professional watching this, please feel free to signpost your patients to this video if you found it helpful. As always, give this video a like and share it with others, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.